Unity is a very powerful game engine, but programming can be quite time intensive. So I've here curated a list of shortcuts which will help reduce the time it takes to make your projects. We'll start with commands you can do in the hierarchy. Let's start simple with renaming. If you don't want to go through the hassle of doing right click and then rename or going to the inspector, you can always press enter to rename any object. This works in the hierarchy view as well as in the assets down here and in many other places. You probably already know that you can use Command or Control C and the same with V to copy and paste objects, but you can actually save yourself the hassle by just doing Command or Control D, and that'll just duplicate the object for you. This is especially helpful if you just want to duplicate a bunch of stuff. Now, I obviously don't want to keep all these lights, so what you can do is instead of selecting each of them and deleting each of them individually, you can just select all of them by pressing on one and then holding Shift and pressing on another object, and it'll select all of the objects in between. If you want to deselect some objects within this list without just deselecting all of them, once you have your list selected, you can Command or Control click certain ones that you might want to keep, and then just delete the rest. Another useful command is creating empty objects. You can simply do that by using Command-Shift-N or in Windows Control-Shift-N, and it'll just create an empty game object here. You can call it what you want. If you want, you can attach your scripts that you might need to it. Now you can do more than just creating empty objects. You can also create them as a parent. It'll save yourself a couple of clicks. All you have to do is Command-Shift-G. I'm using Mac, so I'm going to be saying Command from now on, but if you're using Windows, you just need to replace the command with a control. But anyway, so if I do Command-Shift-G, you'll see it created the parent object there. I can do that as many times as I would need to. You can also create a child object by doing Alt-Shift-N, and that'll just make one underneath. Now, normally it would be quite annoying to open each of these things individually, like if you have a bunch of these in a row, it's kind of annoying to have to open each of them, but you can save yourself the time by holding Alt and then clicking on the arrow, and then that'll open or collapse all of them if you just want to keep it in this view. If instead of deleting an object, you just want to quickly disable it, you can click on the objects you want to enable or disable, and then just click Alt-Shift-A, and boom, there you go. Now they're all disabled, and you can press it again to re-enable them. Also, if you want to save yourself a small amount of time, you can do Command-Shift-A, and it'll bring you into the inspector, and from there you can just add a component. Lastly, if you want to quickly edit some prefabs, you can just press P while hovering over a prefab, and it'll bring you to the prefab editing window. And you can do all the changes you need to over there. Okay, now we're in play mode. I'll use this to demonstrate some of the scene commands you can use. By the way, this is a game you can play if you want to. It's on my itch.io page. I'll put a link in the description. Back to the video, let's look over here into our scene view. And first, let's get out of 2D mode so we can fully appreciate all of the commands. You probably already know that you can use right click to look around the scene. You may also know that you can use W, A, S, and D while you're holding right click to move in the direction like you would in a normal platformer. But did you know you can also use E and Q to go up and down? This is some very neat movement, and it's very standard to learn this. It'll save you a lot of time if you're moving around the scene. So you can use right click to look around. You can also use Alt left click to orbit around whatever it is you're targeting. You can use the middle mouse to drag your view without turning at all. These will be the basis of your movement, and if you're not familiar with this, you should definitely get acquainted with it. Okay, so now let's find out where this object is in the scene. If we're way over here, like let's say we have no idea where this object is and we just want to find where it is, you can click on it in the hierarchy, and then in the scene view you press F, and that'll bring you to where this block is. Like let's use it to bring ourselves to the player. If you press Shift F or just F twice, it'll follow it throughout the whole time instead of just going to it once. So if I move it in the game now, you'll see in the scene view it actually still follows, and it even helps through animations and all that. While we're here, there's also some quick tips with snapping. If you hold Command, or I guess Control on Windows, and move a block around, it'll stick to the grid. Now you can change the size of this grid if you just search for grid and snap settings in the project settings. You can see here is all of the settings, and you can change how big the grid is, and it'll also work with rotations. So here we can, for example, instead of just rotating freely, we can hold Command or Control to snap it to a grid. Also, if you hold V, you can actually move the corners or vertexes of an object around. Now this is a little tricky to do, so if you want, you can also press Shift V and that'll toggle it on and off. Then you can do it at your own free will. And this will automatically snap to all vertices around the scene. And then you just press Shift V to toggle it off. Lastly, you can quickly change between the tools that are up here just by pressing the first couple keys on the keyboard. So Q is the move around tool, W will bring you into the movement interface, E brings you to rotations, R is the scaling, T is the rect transform tool, and Y is the universal tool. Also, you can align an object with your own view in the scene here. This is especially useful in 3D games if you want to try a couple different camera positions. You use Command-Shift-F, or you can also go up here and press Align with View. And then it'll go to where your camera was at that position. So you'll see it's over here. Okay, for the next tip, I'm going to show you some stuff in the inspector. You may already know that if you click and drag on certain boxes here, you can actually change their values. Now, if you want, you can press Shift and then it'll change more quickly, or you can also press Command or Control and then they'll change less quickly. But instead of awkwardly changing the size of this, if you have some sort of UI object and go over here, normally these buttons don't do anything about the actual size of the object itself, but if you press Alt, you can see there are some presets here, and you can snap your object to certain corners, or if you want, you can also stretch it across an entire plane real quick. Okay, now let's check some quick shortcuts in Visual Studios. We'll start with Alt and then up or down. What it does is if you press it, it'll slide your line of code either higher or lower. You can also highlight multiple regions of code and then use Alt up and down to slide them around if you want. This is great for doing some quick reformatting. Also, if you want to use the arrow keys to go to a certain part of code, that can sometimes take a bunch of clicks to get to the proper space. So what you can do instead is you can use Alt arrow and that'll go one code section at a time. So it'll go to what's important of the code. So you can go between the dots and the ands and greater than, less than, and then you can go and do what you want with the rest. This also works with Shift, so you can just select a certain part of code like this real quickly instead of inaccurately doing it with just the arrow keys. You can just quickly select it using Alt and Shift. Or you can also use Command and Shift, and that'll go to the very beginning or end of a line. Or if you use the up and down arrows using Command, which will bring you to the top or bottom of a page, you can select, for example, the bottom half or top half of a certain part of code. You can also really quickly and easily find where some code is written. Just let's say we want to find out where this player movement is without going through our entire solution. You can also use this to find out about code that you yourself haven't written, including, like, let's say you want to find out what's in this rigid body and write a similar piece of code. Like, let's say you want to take over some code here from the rigid body 2D because it's nicely written, or you just want to find out what other stuff they have. You can do that. You can also indent a line of code by doing Command and then the curly bracket. You can press that as many times and you switch between both of the curly brackets. If you do Command Shift and the curly brackets, you can also change the tabs left to right. It's nice for some quick movement between tabs because then you don't have to go up to a certain area. It's a lot quicker in my opinion. Another really cool trick is if you select a variable, you can press Shift F12, or if you're on a Mac, Function Shift F12, and it'll bring up this cool little menu where you can see where this variable is being used in all of your code that you've written. And you can just go over here and double click it and just go to exactly where it is and what script it's in. It's really handy if you're trying to debug why some variable is being weird. In a similar vein, let's say you want to rename a variable, but you don't want to go through all the trouble of finding it in all of your scripts and changing the name, you can do it real easy by using Command R, and then it'll highlight your little piece of code here, and you can change it how you want. And then you just press enter, and Visual Studio will have renamed this variable for all the instances where it occurs. Lastly, and this is my most favorite command of all, is whenever you get a red line here in Visual Studios will give you a reason as to why it's not working, of course. But if you press Alt-Enter or Control-, it'll bring up this menu where you can fix whatever is wrong. So here, for example, I just need to add a field. And by pressing enter a couple times, it'll have created a private transform, and that way the code now works. Now this is super smart and super useful. I super recommend playing around with this, but it'll also work with, let's say we want to create a quick method. Like let's say we want to do something like get player. We can type that in, and then Visual Studios will underline it in red because it's obviously not defined. If we press Alt-Enter or Control-, we can just generate the method, and boom, here we go. Now we can just fix this and do whatever we want. Now I'm really impressed by this, it's really smart, it knows exactly what you're going for. So certainly try and use it if you haven't used it before. Okay, I'm gonna quickly go over some of the shortcuts for some of the windows. You might have seen earlier how I was switching between the hierarchy and the inspector. This is very useful if you want to minimize the amount of stuff that's on screen, or if you, for example, want to look at the scene and the game view, or a whole bunch of windows at once. It's super useful to know these. There's one for every window, and you can quickly switch between them. And it's nice and simple. It's Command, or I guess on Windows Control, +1 is the scene view, that's up here. So if we put this on 1, you'll see it'll always go to the scene view, even if I'm like on the game view. 2 is the game view, so I can quickly switch between those. 3 is the inspector, and 4 is the hierarchy, so I can switch between those. 5 is the project view, and mind you, these will open the tabs if you don't have them open already. So Command 6 is the animation window. We can, for example, dock that here and quickly switch between project and animation. 7 is the profiler, 8 is the audio mixer, and Command 0 is the services tab. There's also Command Shift C, which will open the console, and Command Shift B, which will open the build settings. Also, by the way, if you want to quickly hit build and run, you can just do Command B instead. Also, did you know that if you press Shift Space while your mouse is hovering over a window, it will go full screen, or it'll minimize. You can do this if you want to go full screen in any of the windows, and it's especially useful, of course, in the game view, because then you can play in full screen. And then you just press Shift Space to exit. Also, did you know that if you have an error here or even a debug, you can double click it to go to the line of code where it's actually called up. This is so much quicker than finding what line of code it is here and going to it. You can just double click it and it brings you right to it. And then you can just correct the code. The next shortcut is Command P, which will be the same as hitting the play button up here. You can also press it again to stop the game, or press Command Shift P to pause. And that way, when you start the game, it'll immediately be paused. If you want to do a step forward, you can do Command Alt P. Okay, those were all the shortcuts. But my video is not over yet. If you go into the help menu and search for shortcuts, or just find it in the preferences, you'll find this wonderful window. This is where I found all my exotic commands. Now here are literally all of the commands that Unity allows. You'll notice some of them have shortcuts which you can use, and some don't. And the great thing is you can change these. So let's say you wanted to add a hotkey for opening the collab window. You can just search for collab here and it'll bring you to this collaborate thing. And you can just double click here and put a shortcut. Let's do Command 9 because for some odd reason, Command 9 is not used. Despite Command 1 through 8 and Command 0 being used as window switching tools. Anyway, this is a short thing I like to use. There are countless other things, and I recommend that you go look through this. You can see which keys are assigned and unassigned. and you can find exactly what you want to use. There's also a bunch of actions which are commands but haven't been assigned any keys. For example, importing new assets. I've added one here, but this is immensely useful. You can do it for literally anything. You can also search by the shortcut. So let's say I wanted to find out what command P is. You can see here it's edit or play, but you can assign keys to all of these. You can also see which ones are being used. And if we, let's say, look at Shift Option N, which is required by Unity to be left alone, this is creating empty children. If you want to make new commands, you can always look at the unassigned keys. Now there's countless ones that you can use. Of course, the more common ones, these red ones, you definitely can't use. The blue ones are a bit contextual. It depends on which window you're using it, but the red ones you can't use at all. So look for the white ones. Those are completely open. There's no shortcut that uses them, and you can fill them up with any command you want. Like creating folder, how is that not a shortcut? You can look through there, I recommend it. There's so many commands and they are gonna speed up your productivity immensely. It is so helpful and so few people know about this. You can even have here different profiles if you want to switch between different profiles that you use for whatever reason. Anyway, that was today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please leave a like. And if you really enjoyed it, subscribe. It's free. That's it. I'll see you next time.